Welcome back to Jeff Randall Live. Vince Cable claims to be pro-business and pro-market. But in a speech to the Lib Dem conference in Liverpool, his language struck a very different chord. Markets, he told the faithful, are irrational and rigged. Forceful intervention in the murky corporate world is required to ensure that spivs and gamblers and their accomplices in the city don't make fat profits. And that was just the hors d'oeuvre.
Why do directors sometimes forget about their wider duties when a cheque's waved in their face? Capitalism takes no prisoners, and it kills competition when it can, as Adam Smith explained over 200 years ago.
So, does capitalism work for us? I'm joined now by Dr. Madsen Pirie, president of the free market think tank, the Adam Smith Institute, and Anne Pettifer, who is a fellow at the left-leaning New Economics Foundation and the author of The Coming First World Debt Crisis. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us. And you first. Look, if it wasn't for capitalism, you wouldn't be standing there talking to me. We'd have a state monopoly, the BBC, no Sky News, and that would be a terrible thing, wouldn't it?
Well, no. The fact is that,
It wouldn't be a terrible thing?
No, well, we've got at the moment we still have a free market in ideas, and that's a good thing. We have plurality and diversity in thinking and in ideas, and Sky contributes to that. The question is whether or not Sky or Mr. Murdoch and the News Corporation is going to increase their concentration in the field of ideas and in the media. And whether Mr. Cable will challenge that attempt, if you like, to corner the market in ideas. And that's what will be the test, in my view, of Vince Cable ultimately.
Well, we'll come back to that in a minute, but if we're talking about monopolies, I think the BBC could give anybody a run for their money. Dr. Pirie, doesn't Vince Cable have a point? Look, there were some pretty bad practices over the last 10 years. They were an embarrassment to those of us who believe in the free market, and something has to be done.
Indeed, yes, but government has not been perfect either if you look at its record over the last 10 years. And the question is, are politicians more competent than business people to run the business of Britain? I think you'd be very hard put to make the case in favour. If Vince Cable had read the next 3 pages of Adam Smith, he'd have discovered that while Smith did indeed say that businessmen like to seek monopolies if they can, it's only government regulation that enables them to do that. And if he'd read on, he'd no doubt have changed his view.
And Pettifer, Vince Cable talks about capitalism killing competition, but he kind of conveniently avoided that it also creates new competition, what Schumpeter described as creative destruction.
I think it does, if it's not corrupted. I mean, capitalism as such, as you've said well, Jeff, serves us if it becomes servant to society. But what we've had is a corruption of capitalism, so that it's become quite a destructive master and a massive concentration in, for example, banking as a result of the crisis. And that hasn't been capitalism. The fact is that the finance sector has been bailed out by the taxpayer, has had to rely heavily on government for all its risk-taking. And we are now in a situation of intense moral hazard, as it's called, because the banks know that they can now be gamblers and spivs to their heart's delight, and the taxpayer will bail them out. That ain't capitalism, and that ain't a free market.
Dr. Pirie, you're shaking your head furiously here. What's your reaction to that point?
It conveniently overlooks the fact that capitalism is the most benign development that human beings have ever done. It's created the wealth that has more than doubled lifespans. It's lifted more millions of people out of poverty and squalor than anything else human beings have ever done. It makes it possible for us to pursue artistic and cultural lives. It pays for the symphony orchestras and the arts gallery and the art galleries. It puts every single penny into the coffers that Vince Cable wants to spend.
I'm sorry,
and your turn, sorry. Anne Pettifer, please have a go.
The taxpayer pays for those wonderful assets. Right now,
and where
we
does
are
the taxpayers' money come from? It comes from the wealth generated by capitalism. It doesn't appear out of nowhere.
Well, I'm sorry, but right now, the taxpayer is suffering. We have 2.5 million people unemployed. We have 184,000 young people that we have paid to have educated and trained at university who don't have jobs to go to. We have a
capitalism that creates the jobs that provide the wages out of which taxes are paid. There would be no money if it weren't for capitalism.
I'm not saying that capitalism doesn't create jobs, and I'm not saying that capitalism isn't a good thing when it's properly regulated. What we have now, and I have to agree with what Lord Turner said last night, is a corrupted form of capitalism that would have made Adam Smith turn in his grave, where the spivs and the gamblers are being bailed out by taxpayers, by very poor people.
Politicians should know all about spivs, and what Lord Turner also said was that while there were failings in capitalism, the failings of government and policy were much more serious and a much bigger factor.
I couldn't agree more with him.
Well, that's something we both agree on.
And that's because those politicians were, in a sense, corrupted by capitalism and persuaded that actually regulation wasn't a good thing.
I think simple incompetence is probably a more likely explanation.
Well, I don't think so. I think it was a very concerted effort after the 1970s by the finance sector to persuade politicians to turn a blind eye to their reckless activities in the financial markets, and which subsequently brought down the global economy. I have no truck here for politicians. I think they've let us all, and they've let our democracy down. I want to see Vince Cable stand up to those, what I think are corrupt capitalists, and tell them that actually they're here to serve society and not to be masters of society.
Oh, I don't really want business to be ruled by politicians. Heavens, they make a bad enough job of politics.
Well, I'm sorry, but if you take, for example, the case of Iceland, where fishermen in a capitalist society went out fishing fish, and in a free-for-all, depleted fish stocks and depressed prices, caused unemployment, and, messed up the Icelandic economy. Government stepped in, regulated, produced quotas, tradable quotas, and Iceland went from being a very poor country to one of the richest in Europe by the year 2000, before it was subsequently bankrupted by its reckless bankers.
But it was indeed a market solution to fish conservation that worked. It was essentially a capitalist market solution that did the job.
But it required government to introduce that solution, because the market itself could not do that.
Well, no one suggests there should be no government at all. We're talking about the degree to which we can trust them to micromanage things that are actually probably better done by ordinary people in business, making decisions, making economic calculations, doing the best they can.
Madsen, I would be happy if government macro-managed rather than micromanaged. It's macro-management that Lord Turner is right in saying has been absent.
Anne Pettifor, many, many thanks. It's been a great debate. I've really enjoyed it. You've made me completely obsolete, which is probably what Sky News needs. Madsen Pirie and Pettifor, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.